The Secretary of State calls the president a moron. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee then says that the Secretary of State is one of the three people who, quote, separate our country from chaos. This week's chaos in the Trump administration is by now unsurprising and was, in effect, predicted by the new book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president, edited by Bandy Lee, MD, a psychiatrist. The book includes and validates some of the general news media's speculation about Donald Trump's mental capacity. There is this passage in the book from a David Brooks column in the New York Times. He cannot be contained because he is psychologically off the chain. With each passing week, he displays the classic symptoms of medium-grade mania in more disturbing forms: inflated self-esteem, sleeplessness, impulsivity, aggression, and a compulsion to offer advice on subjects he knows nothing about. His speech patterns are like something straight out of a psychiatric textbook. Manics display something called flight of ideas. It's a formal thought disorder in which ideas tumble forth through a disordered chain of associations. One word sparks another, which sparks another, and they're off to the races. As one trained psychiatrist said to me, compare Donald Trump's speaking patterns to a Robin Williams monologue, but with insults instead of jokes. And David Brooks wrote that column over a year ago when Donald Trump was the Republican nominee for president. The reported reason that the Secretary of State called the president a moron was because the president compared the Afghanistan war policy to the renovations of the 21 Club restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. President Trump told his national security advisors a story of the 21 Club hiring very expensive consultants for a renovation that took well over a year and ended up changing virtually nothing in the restaurant. And Trump's point was that talking to the waiters at the restaurant would have led to a better, more efficient set of choices than listening to the so-called experts. And so why should he listen to the experts on Afghanistan? And when that story became public, the 21 Club said not one word of it was true. The owner of the 21 Club at the time said, I have no idea what was in his head. I never have. The editor of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump and the author of Donald Trump's first book, The Art of the Deal, will join us next.
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said.
We're joined now by Dr. Bandy Lee, a forensic psychiatrist on the faculty of the Yale School of Medicine, and the editor of the new book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. Also joining us, Tony Schwartz, co-author of Donald Trump's best-selling book, The Art of the Deal. He was actually the real author of the book. His co-author, Donald Trump, didn't write a word of it. And Tony Schwartz also has an entry in this new book, edited by Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee, what brought the group together to produce this book? Because I know a year ago, it was very difficult for me to find a psychiatrist who was willing to come on television and talk about Donald Trump, because the general rule was, it's a patient I haven't diagnosed, so how can I talk about it?
Well, that was my same experience when trying to write to various Congress members. Initially, I had a letter of concern, and then I had organized a conference to speak about the ethics of the duty to warn versus the duty to refrain from commenting on public figures.
And so basically, it's a judgment among the professionals that, in this case, the duty to warn outweighs that the consideration that would normally apply, which is I'm not going to offer a public diagnosis of a person I have not met.
Yes, and initially it was very hard to get any co-signatories to the letters I was writing, or to get any co-organizers for the conference. But after the conference, hundreds of mental health professionals got in touch with me, expressing their same concern. The assessment was almost unanimous that they were all concerned and did not know of a way to speak about it. And now we have about 4,000 members to the coalition that we had named Duty to Warn. We have 63,000 signatories to a petition that John Gartner had created. And when I was compiling this book, we couldn't include everybody because there were so many people coming forth. And as you can see, this is just a representative sample of the most eminent members of our field.
You have Lance Dotis in here, who is a former Harvard Medical School faculty who was one of the first psychiatrists to join us here last year and talk about it. Tony, I have a question for you that is about policy and the psyche of Donald Trump. And it's the crucial question of the day or the week for next week. And that is the Iran deal. We have a report coming out tonight saying that the president is going to announce next week that he is going to pull the United States out of the Iran deal. Knowing Donald Trump as you do, and in my judgment, you know him better than anyone who speaks about him publicly, would he pull the United States out of the Iran deal just because Rex Tillerson is in favor of staying with the Iran deal? Is that the kind of psyche we're dealing with?
Well, I don't know that that would be the only reason, but it certainly could put him over the edge. He's getting, obviously, very conflicting advice about whether to do that, and there's still factions in his administration arguing each side. But yes, he is emotionally driven, not obviously intellectually driven. You don't even want to use that word with regard to Trump. And I absolutely believe that any decision he makes is going to be primarily influenced by the intensity of the emotion he happens to be feeling at that moment.
Which includes personal feeling about the person he's dealing with, whether he likes that person or not.
You know, it isn't about liking the person, because Donald Trump doesn't like people. What he does is he sees them as useful or not useful, and he sees them as mirroring him and supporting him, or opposing him and diminishing him. And there's certainly no question that right now he sees Tillerson as someone who is an injury to his sense of himself.
I want to go to just one entry in the book. This is Henry Friedman, Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, on the role of Donald Trump's cabinet relevant to this week's Tillerson story. He says, a paranoid, hypersensitive, grandiose, ill-informed leader such as Donald Trump, who has surrounded himself with a cabinet and set of advisors who either are unable to bring him out of his paranoid suspicions and insistencies, or worse, identify with his positions, represents a multi-dimensional threat to our country and the world. And Dr. Lee, when a psychiatrist sees this that way, that's the definition of the duty to warn.
Exactly. The Goldwater rule itself, which is the ethical guideline not to diagnose a public figure in the open, falls under the ethical principle that we participate in activities that promote public health and public mental health. And so when silence contributes to harm to the public health, then we do have a duty to speak out. And the duty to warn and the duty to protect is pervasive in our practice.
And prior to this situation, the duty to warn generally applied to individual cases. You have a patient who you believe might commit a violent crime or something like that. Tony, take us inside Donald Trump as you know that man. When he gets the news yesterday morning at 6 a.m. that NBC News is reporting that Rex Tillerson has called him a moron.
I mean, it's almost unimaginable how enraged he must have been under those circumstances.
And that's what our reporting is now, that he was enraged.
Because the idea that such a authoritative figure in his own administration, by a guy who claims to prize loyalty, he has none of it evident toward other people, but he expects it from other people, the kind of combination of circumstances had to have put him at a very, and this is when he moves into the kind of emotion where he could vastly overreact. It's the very thing that, as far back as July 16, I was saying made me think that he could, in an impulsive, angry moment, punch in the nuclear codes with nobody between him and our destruction.
Dr. Bandy Lee and Tony Schwartz, thank you very much for joining us. The book is The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, and this is an historic work in the history of American psychiatry. We have never been in this place before. Thank you both very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.